Hello and welcome to the launch of the Creative PEC's latest State of the Nations report on workforce and engagement trends in the arts, culture and heritage sectors. So regular readers of our State of the Nations series will have spotted a common theme throughout our reports, namely the importance for policymaking of tracking data on a longitudinal basis. Now, there are a number of reasons for doing this. One is to understand causal relationships between economic variables as opposed to correlations. So, for example, we might observe that economically more prosperous regions in the UK have more vibrant creative industries, but how policymakers should respond to that depends critically on whether those regions are more prosperous because they have stronger creative industries or whether their greater prosperity accounts for the strength of their creative sector. Perhaps both of these are true. The pattern might also conceivably be a reflection of a common third factor, such as the quality of the workforce, which accounts for both strong regional economies and strong creative economies. The Creative PEC's new Creative Business Panel, which is funded by the AHRC, our funder, and a partnership with the CoStar Foresight Lab, is collecting longitudinal survey data from all parts of the creative industries, including the arts, culture and heritage sectors, to enable precisely this type of causal relationship to be understood. But another reason for tracking longitudinal data over time is simply that it says something about whether policy goals are being met, or they may indicate whether there may be a need for further action. And this is the main reason why you'll be familiar with a key function of our State of the Nations reports being to present regular updates over time on key statistics on the creative industries. So in today's report, we show that the inequalities in the UK's arts, culture and heritage workforce that the Creative PEC has exposed in previous work have persisted in the most recent data. And that while participation data for England shows that the public's engagement in arts and culture has increased since we last reported the numbers, inequalities in engagement along class and ethnicity lines have increased back to pre-pandemic levels. We think this should be of concern to funders and policymakers. Making use of newly available data at local authority level in England, for the first time, we'll hear about how we're mapping in fine-grained geographical detail the inequalities in engagement, which is important because despite the well-documented cuts in arts in funding over time, local authorities remain critically important sources of funding and policy support for arts, culture and heritage. So without further ado, I'll now hand over to my colleague Bernard and the research team to hear the report's findings in more detail.
Well, hi everyone, and as Hasan mentioned already, it's lovely to see so many of you here for today's event. My name is Bernard Hay, I'm Head of Policy at the Creative PEC, and I'm going to be moderating our discussion this afternoon. So for those of you that also haven't heard of us before, the Creative PEC is led by Newcastle University in partnership with the Royal Society of the Arts and funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council, and we thank them for their ongoing support and commitment to our work. So as Hasan has already alluded to, today we're going to be discussing our latest data on UK workforce trends in arts, culture and heritage, alongside new analysis into arts, culture and heritage engagement in England, with a deep dive on how this varies across local authorities. As we'll hear about further from our speakers, place is a crucial theme in this report, and this feels particularly timely. We've seen local elections happening across England last week, but this also comes on the backdrop of an ongoing trend of devolution throughout England and an increasing focus by the current government on tackling inequalities within arts, culture and heritage, both in terms of workforce and audience across the country. So before we dive in, a few housekeeping notes. Firstly, the format for today is that we'll begin with a presentation on the report and accompanying dashboards by two of the report authors, who I'll introduce in a moment, after which we'll open to two expert respondents and audience Q&A. The event is going to last just under an hour, and we're going to record it, and it will be available shortly on the Creative PEC's YouTube channel. And also by registering for this event, you will soon receive our latest reports directly into your inbox, but you will also be able to find it now on our website. So we have left time at the end for questions, so please do post yours as we go through in the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. We're going to try and answer as many as we can. Those that we can't do in the call, we will try and follow up directly by email where that is possible. So at this point, I'd like to introduce two of the report authors to share some of the headline findings and provide an overview of the accompanying data dashboard. So these are Professor Dave O'Brien, who's one of the Creative PEC State of the Nations research leads for arts, culture and heritage, and Professor of Culture and Creative Industries at the University of Manchester, and Dr. Ruoxi Wang, who is Research Associate in the Sheffield Methods Institute at the University of Sheffield. So Dave and Ruoxi, over to you.
Thanks very much, and hello everyone. Thanks for joining us. I am hopefully going to seamlessly share my screen. And no, that has not worked. I'll try that again. Famous last words. Should be able to make that full screen. Excellent. Hopefully you can all see that. Alice or Bernard, shout out if that isn't working. What I'm going to do, as Hasan has said, is give you a flavour of what's in the latest report, a couple of the headlines before handing over to Ruoxi to give you a sense of something that we're particularly proud of, the interactive dashboards where you can get, kind of real granular data on where you live, where you work, areas that might be of particular interest. This brief kind of overview and giving you a kind of a sense of what's in the report is hopefully going to set up both some interesting responses from our panelists, but also some lively Q&A discussion. And I think it's important, before talking about the precise details of the report and getting into Q&A, to give some sense of kind of where we are for the sector. On the one hand, we've seen significant political change. Obviously, there was an election almost a year ago, 10 months ago, and we've seen a new government. But one of the things we flag in the introduction to the report is some significant continuities, both, I think, in terms of the emphasis on the importance of arts, culture and heritage, which has continued with the new government. It's really heartening that we've not seen a kind of a change in rhetoric, at least associated with the importance of this sector. But perhaps we've seen a renewed, if not entirely new, emphasis on the importance of place. And one of the things that has been really quite remarkably kind of good timing in terms of the work we've been doing is that just as the government has been signalling the importance of place in a variety of different ways, as both Bernard and Hasan have flagged, we've had access to data that allows us to really kind of tell the story of particularly cultural engagement from a place-based perspective. At the same time as this kind of story of, I guess, shared themes over the change of administrations, we've also seen ongoing concerns, I think, whether this is to do with access to art, culture and heritage in terms of the workforce or in terms of audiences, in terms of the real kind of weight of financial pressures on organisations, on individual workers, particularly freelancers, but also actually on audiences who, in the context of, I suppose, a kind of an ongoing cost of living crisis, are making quite difficult decisions around things like attendance and engagement. And one of the, I suppose, kind of positive stories against this challenging backdrop that ranges from local, regional, right the way up to national level is the continued commitment that audiences are showing to engaging with the arts and cultural sector. We can't talk about this too much because it's ongoing, but we've got a review of Arts Council England's role. The government consultation, I believe, is still open if any of you would like to kind of contribute to that. And looking slightly further forward, we're likely to see similar kind of challenges, I guess, for the devolved regions as they think about arts and cultural policy moving forward. So although some of the data on audiences is going to be very kind of England specific, some of the challenges, as we flagged in our previous State of the Nation report last year, are quite similar. So what's been going on with workforces? This is national level data that covers all of the UK. We're quite kind of lucky that we can tell this sort of broader national story across the 4 nations. We look at occupations, so we're particularly interested in specific sets of jobs. This is for a variety of reasons that we flag a little bit in the State of the Nation report, but there's a kind of broad academic literature associated with this approach. And it covers anything from people who are working as camera operators, audiovisual operators in the film and television industry, through things like librarians, archivists, curators, and then I suppose the more traditional arts, culture, and heritage occupations, such as being an artist, being an actor, being a musician. The story, again, as Hasan has flagged, and hopefully you can see from this graph that we explain in a lot more detail in the report, is one of continuity from last year. Really, we wouldn't expect much change year on year anyway. Labour markets, unless there are, catastrophic global pandemics, tend not to change radically year on year. And broadly, this is the case. So whilst we're seeing some positives in terms of slightly higher proportions of disabled people across our 4 groups of occupations, we're seeing a potential slight decline in terms of women in particular workforces, such as our key film, TV, and video occupations. And we're seeing, I think, some mixed stories in terms of ethnic and racial diversity, which had, I guess, had some good news in terms of more diversity happening, but we're seeing some challenges now. In publishing, I think there's really good news around ethnic and racial diversity. Museums, libraries, and archives, this kind of static story year on year. Similar music, performing, and visual arts, a rather static story year on year. In terms of social class, the story of, I suppose, middle class origin dominance of key occupations continues. Those sort of purple shaded lines look pretty flat, kind of year on year. Some changes, some nuances depending on which sector we're interested in. And the policy challenges, we've seen both DCMS Secretary of State kind of highlight the need for better access to cultural and artistic occupations, as well as, I think, the kind of media concern around these questions of the diversity of workforce are ongoing, and will require, I think, significant thought around how best to meet these challenges. And we sort of gesture towards this a little bit in the report. In terms of audiences, and again, Hasan and Bernard have sort of gestured towards this already. We've got a fascinating story here, I think, because on the one hand, our report shows some positive news in terms of people turning up to things, so attendance, and people doing things, people's participation. On this graph, the slightly kind of transparent lines are the 22-23 data, which I have an unfortunate habit of referring to as last year. And the kind of bolder, sort of fuller lines are the 23-24 data, which I'm trying to stop myself referring to as this year. What we've seen really is most of our activities, whether by attendance or participation, have gone up over the year that we've got data for. So, for example, if we look at the top there, going to the cinema, we've seen a rise, the thicker, darker, less transparent line for the 23-24 data is showing some quite noticeable higher proportions of people saying they've been to the cinema. More people are saying they've played video games. More people are saying they've been to a theatrical performance. More people are saying they've been to live music. More people are saying they've been to an art exhibition. This story, I guess, of kind of post pandemic return. It sounds a bit strange to be talking post-pandemic, 4 or 5 years later, but it's something that is, I think, really important that we highlight, particularly in a context where those financial pressures and the kind of worries that the sector have got around attracting and keeping audiences are really at the forefront of lots of discussions. Similar stories, albeit a bit more mixed for attending heritage and engaging or attending museums and libraries. Although particular things are slightly down year on year, so going to cities or towns with celebrated historic natures are down a little bit compared between the 2 years. Things like going to a National Trust site, going to a museum or gallery, even kind of online engagement for libraries are up. However, and again, Hasan has kind of flagged this really important finding in the report, the kind of inequalities that hopefully everybody kind of tuning into this has at least some awareness of, and is something that both we at the PEC have tried to kind of highlight, but is also something that policy has been grappling with. These inequalities are persistent. So, for example, if we look at the disabled population, we're still seeing large differences in terms of attendance. So, attending films at cinemas, attending theatres, attending live music. Disabled people are more likely to be participating in particular activities, making art, crafting. But that, I guess, kind of access question, which has long been an issue across arts, culture, and heritage, but also I think more generally in kind of British public life, is still there. Sex, again, ongoing differences, and although we are sort of slightly cautious here, we might see the story as being a set of differences that are between kind of cultural engagement and participation in the home, and then cultural engagement and participation outside of the home. Class differences have increased. So even though we're seeing a kind of story of more people across England engaging in arts, culture, and heritage by either attendance or participation, the social class differences are still there and are not being ameliorated by that kind of broader story. On race and ethnicity, we have got some quite detailed graphs for all of the demographic categories I've been talking about, actually, but I thought I'd kind of flag race and ethnicity because the graph does quite a good job, I think, of showing the differences, whereby the Black and Black British population are seeing slightly kind of higher rates compared to previous years, but those higher rates are, much lower than, for example, the white population. So something like attending the theatre, we're seeing really quite stark levels of proportions of different ethnic groups attending. And one of the stories we try and tell in the report is the need to, on the one hand, I guess, almost celebrate, recognise the continued kind of return to engagement in the English population as a whole, but also to be really attentive to things like ethnic, racial, social class, sex and gender, and disability differences, especially when policy is thinking about access. Again, as I've mentioned, but also Hasan and Bernard have gestured to, and I'm going to wrap up here, is that we've got incredibly great detailed place data now for England. And really, we can do some incredible deep dives into what particular places are into in terms of their arts, culture, and heritage engagement. Some of these stories are slightly predictable and perhaps a little bit depressing, depending on whether you're keen for people to be engaging in art, culture, and heritage. Things like going to an art exhibition, we see a concentration in urban places with particular bits of London having very, very high proportions. City of London, for example, around 70% of people have been to an art exhibition. Boston and Lincolnshire, you know, a more kind of rural place, it's just over 10%. But then the way that particular art forms have, you know, a much more kind of I suppose even spread. So, you know, engaging in craft, participation in craft is something that you know, about just under a third, just over a quarter of the population are doing, almost kind of irrespective of where you're looking. You know, it's a lot of orange on that picture. Similarly, you know, things like playing video games is a shared activity around and across quite a lot of the country. Visiting heritage is high, and you know, we've seen that on the other national picture graphs I showed you earlier, and things like, you know, visiting museums. Again, we've got that slightly kind of urban skew, but actually the news, I think, is quite sort of positive in terms of lots of different regions, lots of different parts of England having visited a museum or a gallery. Obviously, the issue comes when you start to ask, well, what about individual demographics in these places? One thing before I hand over to Ruoxi that we find fascinating, and we've done a kind of a deep dive on, I won't kind of dwell too much and give you too much kind of detailed explanation on these graphs, but the relationship between having cultural workers in a place and then cultural engagement is something that we were particularly kind of fascinated by, and it's something that's enabled really by the high quality and granular nature of the DCMS participation survey. Obviously, there's, you know, to an extent, kind of what we might expect. London has higher levels of artistic, culture and heritage workers. It also has higher levels of different kinds of cultural engagement. So, you know, we see things like Hackney, City of London, Islington as being, you know, very high in terms of cultural workers and attending an art exhibition. And there does seem to be some relationship here. As Hasan has talked about, the need to kind of think about causal rather than just correlations is really kind of crucial here. And I think this type of data sets up some really fascinating research directions as we move forward over the next kind of year or so. The other thing that this granular data allows us to do is to, I suppose, kind of open up the research to you as potential kind of users, and to give you a flavor of what's possible and hopefully a way for you to engage. I'm going to hand over to Ruoxi to give you a demonstration of our research dashboards.
Thanks, Dave. And I'll share my screen now. Okay. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. So following the insights about recent trends in arts, culture, and heritage in England, let's now move on to a more detailed and localized view of the trends using the dashboard. So this 4-page dashboard, alongside our report, we help you navigate the diversity of the audience in your local area using the most up-to-date data. So at the top of the dashboard, you will see 4-page navigation buttons that lead to the main sections of the audience by local authorities, demographic characteristics, activity correlations, and its relationship with occupation. So let's go through the local authorities view first. On the left, you will see an interactive map which shows the engagement rate of different cultural activities. And on the right-hand side, you will see a bar chart which displays the attendance and participation rate in different cultural activities and heritage sites. So in the top right corner of the map, you'll find a local authority filter where you can select your own local area and to explore which cultural activity or heritage site is more popular. And also you can explore the differences among the engagement rate. And similarly, you can just tap your local authority name in the search bar to explore more. Or if you would like to zoom in and zoom out region, you can simply select the local authority by clicking on the area, and the bar chart will update automatically, and click on any empty area to deselect. Right next to the map, you will see an activity filter, which will help you to navigate the distribution of different cultural activities and heritage engagement rate. So for example, you can use the extended button to explore a specific cultural activities. For example, if you are interested in the arts exhibition engagement rate in different area, simply click on the button and you see the map, which give you the detailed information of the participation rate among different regions. And you can zoom in and zoom out and hover over the map to see more detailed information. And now move on to the demographic page. We will look at who is engaging with the arts, culture, and heritage activities, and how this has changed over time. So here you can explore participation by a range of demographic characteristics in the filter, including age, disability, ethnicity, and self-reported happiness level. So with over 20 dimensions, we help you to navigate the diversity across England detailedly. So on the right-hand side, this bar chart will give you the comparison between different groups based on your selection across the past 2 years. So how to play with this page? First, you can select any cultural activities or heritage sites you are interested in. So for example, if you are interested in arts festival, just simply click on this button, and you might be curious about how arts festival attendance differ from the age group. So once we make this collection, you will see the rates of attendance in arts festival among the age group, and simply you can compare the change between these two groups over the past 2 years, and you might find the interesting comparison from the younger group and the older group over the past 2 years. Similarly, you can explore the data from other dimensions. For example, self-reported happiness. You might be curious about whether people who reported they are at higher levels of happiness will attend the activities more. So this page will help us to understand and compare how these patterns differ from groups and shift from year to year. Now move on to the activity correlation page. So this page will help us dig deeper into the audience behavior by showing how different types of cultural engagement relate to one another across local area. So this scatter plot shows a relationship between different cultural activities and the heritage site engagement rate. The x-axis and y-axis represent a different engagement rate based on your selection. And with each dot represent a local authority, you can hover the dot to see the detailed information. And this trend line indicates the strength and the direction of these two cultural activities engagement rate. So for example, you can start by select one cultural activities for x-axis or heritage sites. For example, a historical building open to public, and then you can select the y-axis axis. So for example, a historical place for worship. Then the scatter plot will give you the detailed information about the correlation about these two activities in different local authorities. And if you would like to dig more about your local area, you can simply select your local area or search it in the search bar. You can hold the control key to make multi-selection if you want to compare how these two cultural activities engagement differ from the local areas you are interested in. So this will especially helpful to understand the cross-art form audience behavior and how these patterns of engagement cluster geographically. lastly, we take a similar approach, explore the link between the cultural engagement and creative occupation. So this scatter plot is different from the previous page in terms of the y-axis. So instead of showing the participation in another activity, it shows the proportion of creative occupation workforce for each local area. And this scatter plot, you will see similarly, each dot will represent a local authority, and you can hover to see more information. So for example, if you would like to see how authors in a local authority related to the participation rate or engagement rate in reading, for example, you can just click on the activity and you can find the relationship between these two. And this trend line will help us to explore whether a stronger correlation between the creative workforce is associated with higher engagement rate of the cultural activities you are select. Similarly, you can explore it geographically among local authorities by click on the local area and hold the control key to make multi-selection. You can also multi-select the occupations in your local area to explore more. So if you are interested in the creative labor force and such as freelancers, there are more dashboards available on the PAC's website available for you to explore. So this dashboard is now live, public, and ready to support your work. You can filter and embed the visuals directly, and you are welcome to explore the dashboard on your own now. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dave and Ruoxi, for some really useful headline insights. And I have to say, I think that dashboard looks amazing. And I hope everyone can take some time this afternoon to really explore some of the data in more depth as well. It's a remarkable resource. So at this stage, what I'd like to do is to introduce our expert responders, who are going to share some reflections on what we've presented so far before we open to Q&A. And I've seen that there's questions already coming in the chat, so please do keep posting those as we go through. So our first expert respondent is Dr. Helen Pheby, who's Head of Culture, Heritage and Sport with the West Yorkshire Combined Authority. And there her role involves working in partnership to deliver the West Yorkshire's plan and Mayor Tracy Brabin's pledges, which include a commitment to ensuring that every child in the region has access to culture. And prior to joining the Combined Authority, Helen was also Associate Director at Yorkshire Sculpture Park and previously wrote her PhD, I believe, on equity of access and participation in culture. So well placed to share some thoughts on the findings. So Helen, over to you.
Thank you, Bernard, and thank you very much for the invitation to be here today. It's a huge privilege to be able to share thoughts with you from a mayoral combined authority perspective. And this report is, it represents a really significant undertaking and it's a hugely important piece of work. So thank you to everyone involved and for the clarity of presentation. The evidence is something that really resonates really strongly for me on a personal and professional basis. So I grew up in Wakefield, and it was a school visit to Yorkshire Sculpture Park when I was 7 or 8 that quite simply changed my life and ultimately led me to researching, through a quite circuitous route, researching a PhD, as Bernard mentioned, about why all art isn't public. Why is it that some people have arts, heritage and culture routinely in their lives and others don't? And I have to say, I didn't come up with a lot of answers. I mainly asked a lot of questions, but it's those questions that still continue to motivate me today. And it was only because of the opportunity at Yorkshire Sculpture Park that I was able to stay in Yorkshire, where I feel I belong, where my family and friends are. And I really appreciate the rarity of that opportunity, that not everyone has that. Especially because I was told at school with really good intentions to lower my expectations because I came from Wakefield. So now I'm able to pursue another strand of my career in West Yorkshire due to devolution. So the place-based aspect of this report is incredibly useful and important. And I think observationally, making those connections between where people work and where people live in the culture and creative sectors is kind of, it seems like common sense, but it feels like the first time this is all really sort of coalesced into an understanding of that clustering approach. And we know anecdotally, when I was at the Yorkshire Sculpture Park, people in culture and creativity, arts and heritage sectors said that they would move to West Yorkshire or live near the sculpture park because that existed. So it's really good to see those strong correlations. There's a lot to grasp, there's a lot to dig into. So I'll only touch on a few headlines. So taking a geographical place-based approach, absolutely brilliant. The dashboard tool, I know that we're going to be using that. Our local authority partners, loads of people in the sectors are just going to, it's incredible tool and facility. There's some real positives. So the increase in people going to theatre from 30 to 39%, visiting a gallery 33 to 43%. But it is stark, isn't it, that those inequalities are really persistent. And the fact that all of the local authorities, 13, where over half the population went to an exhibition in the last year, are from London, for example. So some of the findings are sadly not surprising, but they do raise some questions. And this is something that I need to spend some more time with the data and to understand the nuances of. But I'm curious, for example, whether people who are in the audience for Strictly Come Dancing, either on the TV or in person, are they self-identifying as being an audience member in a piece of performing art or in cultural heritage? Similarly, if someone's creating images on AI, are they defining as an artist? And if someone's on curating an Instagram feed, do they define as a photographer? Should they? So there's a lot of stuff that I want to personally spend a little bit more time with. They do reinforce the fact that people working in arts, culture and heritage are disproportionately from managerial and professional backgrounds. There have been a number of really good initiatives over the years, such as the Western Jerwood Creatives Bursaries, which through 4 editions created 173 early career jobs for creatives identifying as being from working class, low socioeconomic background. And it is interesting actually when you see the graph, isn't it, from museums, libraries and archives, that there does seem to be a hopeful change in defined backgrounds. We do know that major moments have real impact in terms of trying to close that gap between employment participation and audiences from different backgrounds. So for example, in West Yorkshire, each of the local authorities has had a year of culture. So obviously it's Bradford 2025 right now. Leeds staged, as Leeds 2023, they staged nearly 2,000 events and 73% Leeds households engaged in some way. Kirklees Year of Music, 1,000 events, 20,000 participants and audiences over 300,000. Calderdale's Culture Dale just concluded 550 events with nearly 100,000 people being engaged. Wakefield Our Year, over 900 events with 20,000 participants and over 420,000 people identifying as audience. Bradford UK City of Culture predicting audiences in the millions. I am curious that Wakefield has been identified as the city with least residents, visiting a museum or gallery at 30%, because it's the only city outside London with 2 UK museums of the years. And we know that the audience numbers for Hepworth and the Sculpture Park are significant. So that's something, and that's why this tool is really fantastic, because it helps us to dig down into that very specific data. And research that has stuck with me that was commissioned by Adele Poppital, who's now Service Director for Culture with Kirklees Council when she was in Wakefield Council in 2002, which still is completely relevant. But one of the barriers to people going to museums or galleries was an inability to imagine outside everyday experience. And that's really critical, isn't it? And that's why my personal journey hopefully is something that is reflected in many others, that if you get to go on a school trip or you get to do something out of your everyday experience, particularly if you're family and not routinely taking up those opportunities, that makes a vital difference. It also makes a vital difference in those venues and to employment, especially for freelance practitioners. So thank you so much. There's a huge amount to work with here. This report is absolutely essential, and thank you everyone involved.
Thanks so much, Helen. And I think it was brilliant to bring in that kind of wider context of how this sits alongside interventions that we know are really making a difference. And I think it's about seeing those 2 bits of data and insight together, I think is really key. And also hopefully we can ask the researchers as well some of those questions around how respondents to the participation survey might respond to certain things, and how this maybe translates as well, particularly to sort of digital media engagement, and as you say, we're kind of watching live streams and television as well. So at this point, I'd like to introduce our second expert respondent, Councillor Peter Golds, who has served as a London councillor for 27 years, including 18 years on Tower Hamlets Council, where he's currently leader of the Conservative group. He's also a member of the Local Government Association's Culture, Tourism and Sport Board, and we're delighted that he's here today to bring that perspective to the conversation. So Peter, would love to hear your thoughts.
Thank you very much. Hello and welcome to everybody. I've only got a short time, so I don't want to have to spend too much time in introductions. On behalf of the LGA and our board, we welcome this report incredibly. It's a brilliant, brilliant piece of work to monitor the trends and pull them together and then give us data sets that we in local government can use in our work. I can only say having robust data and evidence is vital to us in understanding the landscape and looking at trends. And it's essential that we can inform effective decision making and planning for the future. We believe strongly on the LGA and widely across the local government family that arts, culture and the creative industry go towards making a healthy nation. And that percolates everything in local government because we have an enormous responsibility for health and well-being. And this is an enormous part of the work we do. People don't quite understand of how extensive we are in the cultural field and the part we play in setting cultural policy. And the data you have presented in the report, and what's been shown indeed on screen today, helps us to analyse this and plan to do things differently for the benefit of the nation. It's absolutely obvious from just the little bits we saw today that one size does not fit all. The geographic engagement data actually worries me because it does show that how dominating London is compared to other parts of the country. And I was actually disturbed that as it came up on the board to see the areas of the country that are sometimes known as the forgotten areas or the misunderstood areas. And goodness gracious, there are many of the places that need arts and where arts can play for so much. If we go back to the end of the 19th century, let us never forget the work that Emma Combs and Lillian Bayliss did by setting up first the Old Vic and then Sadler's Wells to bring Shakespeare, opera and ballet to the people. But they didn't do it where you would expect. The Old Vic is on the North Lambeth-Southwark border. Sadler's Wells is on Finsbury. They worked to bring Shakespeare, opera and ballet to what would be called the working classes. And my goodness, what work they did and what an achievement it was. Now, looking at what we can do in local government through this data, we can make sure where areas are performing well and share that learning with others so that between us all, we can drive improvement across the board. It's also good to read that the levels of engagement have increased overall, perhaps not where we would wish them and to the levels, but they have increased. But, and there is a huge but, is the trend of widening inequalities, which is a cause for concern, as I said earlier on. We know the cost of living crisis makes some sense, and councils are looking at this data to see how we work with it, because of course, we have ever decreasing budgets. We have more responsibilities and much, much, much lower budgets to do with stuff. And we need to look at policies such as fees, charges, and targeted discount cards to see how we can use those for the benefit of all our pupils. Another important part of our work are libraries, and that's done an enormous part in trying to address imbalances. The summer reading programme was an extraordinary and incredible success. And I've often said of the work it did, it was focused to many of our more difficult areas. And we found that by bringing people in, firstly young people in, often parents were joining in the reading programme. And the cost worked out at £1 a head. And the cost overall was by a silly, almost out of the air calculation, about 2 centimetres of the overall cost of the Elizabeth line. Just look at it like that. Libraries are vitally important. Never forget the words of George Lansbury, the libraries are the universities of the working classes. Now, local government is, as so often, about to undertake massive changes with devolution, with combined authorities, with strategic mayors, and the collapsing of county and district authorities into much larger unitaries. But there will always be a need for local engagement closer to local communities. And as the authorities get bigger, we need to work closer with our communities. Arts and culture and heritage will be the drivers of much of this and could be the drivers of economy at strategic level because of the importance they are in local areas. Never forget how much money arts and culture brings into this country and how much of importance it is to the employment levels in this country. As a result of the financial position councils are in, and many ways, sadly, the non-statutory nature of arts, culture and heritage, councils are looking to grow their local economies and improve the financial position of residents. And I go back to the point we said at the beginning, good data is absolutely at the root of what we do. If we go before our local cabinet, if we go before the LGA, if we go before overview and scrutiny and can produce data to prove what we are saying for the work that needs to be done in arts, then that is half of the battle done. And goodness gracious, just looking at what you produced us today shows what a really good data set can do for us. I have to very quickly refer to the elections last week. The major parties in many ways did not do well, and we now have the new guys on the block, which are the Reform Party, while claiming they'll cut expenditure in certain areas. So we will have to, at the LGA, and I believe in the wider, work with these new councils and make sure they understand how important the arts, culture and heritage are for their local economy and for the health and well-being of their communities. So let us look to the future. I can say as things currently stand is that local government is desperate to work with the arts and culture community, but there are hardships and there are difficulties, not least financial. But this report, this data gives us a tremendous position to work with, and we can do so much to work with you. Thank you very much for the invitation, and I appreciate being able to speak to you today.
Thank you so much for those remarks. And I think it's always worth reminding everyone that local government is the largest funder of arts and culture in the UK and do so much more than simply funding as well for the sector. So it's brilliant to have your reflections and thoughts on the panel as well. So we've got just a few minutes and I can see there's quite a few questions in here. So I'm just going to dive straight in and we'll see how many that we can cover. So I think start off a question here around participation rates in photography. So it's a question from Isabel. So interesting to see that participation rates for photography are low in general. How might these statistics be linked to funding opportunities? I'm aware that over the past few years, photography only related participation events have been significantly affected by a lack and reduction in funding. So, Dave, at the risk of putting you on the spot, perhaps you'd like to take this one around sort of how might this data be looked at in the context of kind of funding challenges as well?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably three ways. One is to make a case, to say this might be something that we need to invest more in because it's got low participation. There are various kind of art forms that have low engagement measured by participation and attendance that we think it's really important to invest in. So that is a kind of starting point. The second thing is thinking about this over time where, and again, Isabel, you've alluded to this, and actually a couple of other questions have asked around the impact of particular policies. So not only making the case for investment, but also saying, what's been happening over time and where, I suppose, the impact of particular funding decisions, broader kind of policy contexts might be. And then particularly the kind of granular local authority level allows us to kind of reflect on both what's happening, whether your area is a bit of an outlier, whether it's, doing better or worse in terms of the kind of broader levels of engagement with photography, but then also kind of, and Peter has talked about this already, talking to your individual councillors about, this is something that maybe proportionally more people are doing locally, we'd like you to get behind it. Or, this is something we think is important and, far too few people compared to other places are doing it locally. We'd like you to get behind it. So yeah, there's three kind of possible ways of making a funding case. Yeah, just off the top of my head. Just quickly, Bernard, not to go off topic, Sarah Gregory flagged something really kind of early on around, kind of getting behind a diverse workforce as a source of growth. And I think that is something that we're particularly interested in as we've got these kind of long-term challenges that, Helen had talked about in terms of the workforce. And I think that's something that is kind of particularly interesting in a policy context, this kind of question of kind of what works in terms of the relationship between growth in the sector and then opening up the workforce, which, as Peter has kind of alluded to, there's broad agreement on the importance of the workforce and kind of supporting the arts, culture and heritage workforce, and kind of how we do that best is a really crucial question.
So much, Dave. I mean, that question of what works is one that I'd love to pick up from a question from Michelle. And Helen, I'm going to come to you with this one. So I think to slightly tweak the question here, it's broadly around how do you measure and appraise the success of cultural investment across disciplines? So what kind of metrics do you use? What might be some of your criteria? And Helen, I thought particularly as well from the context of your work in the combined authority, be interested in terms of how you're thinking about, what does success look like for the interventions that you're supporting, and how do you appraise that in the decision making that you're undertaking?
Absolutely. So there's the economic benefit and the calculations around that, return on investment, and there's quite clear procedures for that. But we do also measure social impact, which is obviously a little bit more tricky to capture. But we have a really strong evaluation team, and so at the beginning of any planned investment, or when we're comparing potential investments, the evaluation team with their logic model, and then we work that through, and then it's evaluated against the criteria that we've set. So that could be audience figures, that could be tourism, it could be an uplift in hotel rooms. It's quite varied and it's often bespoke, but there are particular benchmarks that we work with. I mean, there's also the happiness. I love the happiness index. That goes a long way, doesn't it? That's really important.
I mean, I think it speaks to the point that Peter made earlier as well about trying to think about that kind of holistic and often indirect benefit the sector has, and how you capture that, and particularly key, I guess, in a very tight funding environment as well. So I'm mindful of time, and I know there are more questions here than we can answer, but I did want to pick out at least one or two if we've got time. So I think one for Dave and Ruoxi, is there a correlation with workforce and education attainment level, e.g. college leavers who attended Russell Group universities who then graduate and work in the sector? I know this is something that you've looked at previously in recent work as well, so I don't know if you'd like to say a little bit about that.
Yes. And then we can move on. Yeah, like the in PEC work, so we published some stuff on graduate outcomes quite recently for the PEC. We're working on an academic paper on this, but also in work that was supported by the previous iteration of the PEC for the APPG, the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Creative Diversity. We looked in quite a lot of detail at the relationship between higher education and entering the creative workforce. So that is absolutely central. One of the kind of lines we've got in that report, and also in some non-PEC work with the Sutton Trust, is this idea that having a degree is not essential to being a creative worker, to being an arts, culture and heritage worker, but it's pretty certain that if you're an arts, culture and heritage worker, you're going to have a degree, particularly if you're under 40, where we've got, you know, levels 75, 80, even 90% in particular places and in particular jobs, especially London. So yeah, this relationship is absolutely crucial. And, you know, it goes beyond just the Russell Group actually as well. Higher education is really kind of central to who gets to be a creative worker. It's also central to explaining differential patterns of engagement with arts, culture and heritage too, which is pretty well established in the academic literature, but we've not really written about it here. Do you want to say anything else, Ruoxi? I might have covered it.
Yeah. Since I think about the relationship between the creative education and the enter to the creative occupation workforce. One of our previous recent released report have already focused on that kind of question. We explored what kind of factors may impact people enter to study creative subjects and literally the path to go through the creative workforce, and the relationship between that, I think there are a lot of like inequality during this pathway. And also we have an upcoming blog. We discussed about the factors impact what people study creative subjects and how that impacts their following ways to enter to the subject, enter to the occupation and the industries. I think that will be give further detailed information if you are interested in education and creative occupation.
Thanks so much, Dave and Ruoxi. So I've just looked at the time and we are getting to 1 o'clock, and we're really keen to not keep you later than we said we would. So what I'm going to do is sort of bring the event to a close now. However, what we will do is we will try and answer some of the questions that we haven't been able to cover in the Q&A in a follow-up by email to those that would like that as well. So what I'd like to do then is to thank all of you for joining our launch event today and for your questions, which really demonstrate, I think, a breadth of interest and breadth of perspectives on this topic. Let's say special thanks to our speakers, Hasan, Dave, Ruoxi, Peter and Helen, for sharing your wisdom and insights with all of us today. Thank you as well to our funders, the Arts and Humanities Research Council, and to the wider PEC team that have helped to deliver today's report and event. So please also do look out for an event evaluation that will be making its way to your inbox. Do tell us what we can do better, what you'd like to see more from the PEC and events like these. And also do keep an eye out for the launch of our up next State of the Nations report, which will look on migration and address some of the questions that have been raised around kind of visas. Do sign up to our newsletter and we'll be sharing more details on launch dates and how to sign up for that in due course. But I think that's it from us. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. We hope you all have a great rest of the day.